Hello and welcome to the eCommerce Podcast, the show dedicated to helping 7- and 8-figure brand owners build incredible businesses and amazing lives. And today on the show, very excited to be joined by Tracy Wallace. She is the writer of Contentment, a fantastic weekly newsletter on content that she's been writing for years. And she's also the director of content strategy over at Klaviyo. And I've been following Tracy's work for years. There's a lot of people in content. There's a lot of people talking about it. There's a lot of people saying the same things, but I've noticed her content is about content, very meta, but it is more on point. It's more actionable. It's more real, and hoping to have a discussion about this. And I have a sense based on some of the things we were talking about earlier, we are going to have a real, I'm looking forward to this, to talk about the state of content today and a lot of things. So Tracy, welcome. Good to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I will say your content over the years has also been a huge inspiration as well. So I'm very, very excited to be here.
Thanks. Appreciate it. I think we've kind of seen the same or a similar arc of content, because how long have you been in the content game for?
Oh my gosh. Since 2010.
2010. And I started 2008. So like a couple of years. So we've seen very similar trajectories. And we were both saying before we got on that we both feel kind of jaded about content at like the way that content is right now online. And I think we were trying to we're maybe playing part therapist to each other. Is it because we've been doing this for 15 plus years and you're just burnt out and we're just washed up? Or is it because there's systemically changes that are making content less fun, less harder to make it work? Anyway, so what do you think? Why the jadedness factor for you at the moment?
Oh, I have so many thoughts on it. So one, I feel like I contributed in a way to the way that content over the last maybe 5 years or so panned out, which is when I was editor-in-chief over at BigCommerce, SEO was our only goal. Right? We were wanting to drive organic search traffic, and did we do it? It was great. We were very successful. But there was a lot of that era of content marketing, which we were kind of newcomers to it or early to it, spawned a lot of SEO templates, copycats, a variety of things that I think ultimately just made content on the internet worse. And that I think sucks. Another thing though, and this is true for content folks in general, or content marketers, is goals change, right? Content marketers, goals change and career paths change. When I first got into content marketing, I was coming from the journalism world. And it was a great time to get out of the journalism world. Things were very headline clickbaity at the time. And it didn't feel good to necessarily be there. And when I jumped into kind of the tech marketing content space, nobody at tech companies cared about content. As a result, it wasn't always great because I was off on an island by myself a lot of the times. But what was great about it was that we could test things, we could get stuff out, we could figure out what was working. There was this newness to it. There was this funness to it. And there was this kind of belief that we were producing helpful content for our audiences because they needed it. We were trying to get them to do a thing. Right. It's that is what content marketing still is, but it has become a career path now, right? It is an important part at a lot of organizations. And like anything in marketing or like anything, within a business world, it gets the bigger it becomes, the more it gets measured, the more eyes are on it. And in a lot of ways, I think that has diluted kind of what was so fun about content in the early days. And some of that also just comes from content marketing is still a rather new discipline. And it is hard to figure out how to scale content marketing production, as well as how to educate executive leaders on yes, its ability to drive revenue and traffic, but the brand side of it as well. So I think content marketing is kind of in it, it's a victim of its own success, like so many things.
Yeah, I have a couple of takes here. I want to see where you agree with these, and if you think they're on base, or if I'm getting some of these wrong. So I think about like my content trajectory started off
Yeah.
and built e-commerce fuel largely on the backs of really in-depth articles on my own experience building e-commerce stores, right? And so one, I was very fresh in the trenches at that time. Two, there wasn't as much information about it in the time. This was like, 2012, 13, 14. And that's really how I built the brand. And I think since then, a couple of things have happened. One, and I feel like I've seen this happen with a lot of content people. Doing content, it's easy to, if you haven't done content before, I think it's easy to underestimate how much time goes into a really good piece. And it's very difficult to be exceptionally good at content and exceptionally good at another craft and doing those simultaneously. And so for me, I've noticed like a lot of my experience in the e-commerce world became less relevant because I was spending so much time on the content side or the promotion of the brand building side. And I've seen this arc happen with numerous people throughout the years. So that's one thing. But the other thing too, I think, is like you've had so much more information and so much more just raw data and content is out there that you can find details on almost anything. And I feel like today, much more of what I listen to and the voices I'm drawn to are people who have very strong convictions and are willing to talk about them, especially in a very entertaining and a funny way.
Right.
Like we've come through, for better or for worse, I think it's worse, an era of time where it's so difficult to have conversations about anything that's even wide, like border, even a little bit sensitive without feeling like, hey, I'm going to get canceled or I'm going to get shut down. And so the people today that are willing to lean into that in a respectful way, but in a strong and convicted way, those are the voices I find myself being more drawn to. Anyway, so I like personally, I'm thinking like, what is it? What are the things that I really want to stand for and put out into the world? I don't know. Does any of that? So I kept a bunch I threw out. What resonates? What doesn't? Right there.
So I want to talk about the first point, which is you started growing when you were writing these long form pieces, like as a practitioner yourself. I will say I have had so many in-depth conversations with fantastic content marketers at so many organizations where the question has come up like, is it possible to grow a like high performing content marketing organization with more than like one person? Like to a large extent, my success at BigCommerce was similar to your success. I was in the BigCommerce product. I was building my own stores over there. I was learning side by side with the audience and then educating the audience on what I found, right? And I was lucky as somebody learning because I worked in the organization where it cost me no money or time. I was getting up from my desk and walking over to ask somebody, how does this work? Can you show it to me? And then I'd go and replicate it myself. And that made the content a lot more believable. It came from a much more honest place. And then, of course, like you do that enough iterations over time. Well, like now you become this like expert in a thing. People begin to trust that content. And I have joked with my frenemies who were over at Shopify at the time. So like, Tommy Walker, Aaron Orendorff, that like their strategy, they had a lot more people. I was a one-person content team at BigCommerce. That like my main differentiator against them was I would read everything they published and I was like, half of this isn't actually possible. Like you just published a post about like how to start a business in like 48 hours. It's like, okay, I guess like technically you could do that. But like from my experience starting my business, here's all the pre-steps that go into that. And those count as like time spent in it, so on and so forth. And so that was like my kind of underdog way in. Over here at Klaviyo, one of the ways that I've tried to address that issue, because we have journalists writing for us, right? Is we try to every single piece we put out interviews at least 3 experts, so like people who are in it day in and day out. From a reader point of view, I think it's still wildly helpful, but I do have that like piece in like the back of my mind where I'm like, we aren't writing it in that way that I was before, the way that you got started, right? Which is from I'm doing the thing. I'm learning it as I go and explaining it to you. And like, there's something really powerful about that that's been lost in a lot of content marketing roles in organizations.
Yeah, I think it boils down to just, you touched on it at the beginning. Is it possible to scale a really wildly successful organic content campaign? And I don't know if I've ever seen it done. And like, we tried to do that over the last year at ecommerce fuel to invest in SEO content and invested a reasonable amount of money to do it.
Right.
And the people we worked with were fantastic, but it didn't work well. It didn't pencil out. And I'm struggling to think of anyone I know that has built a really thriving organic content. We're talking about written content here, even video, right? Like, apart from the person who's doing the thing, who cares about, who owns the brand, who's deeply vested, that succeeds. And I don't know if I can think of anyone. I mean
HubSpot, of course, is like the one, but I say it the one like that because HubSpot started inbound marketing, but they're a media company now. You listen to their content leaders, that is how they describe it. They see their competitors as like media companies. It's like Fast Company and so on and so forth, right? That is that the path? Like if you scale it, do you have to become a media company? And you see a lot of content marketers kind of pontificating on that or saying that that's the path. The problem with that path is that most media companies make money off of advertising, and that's not how content marketing makes its money. And so like, in my mind, those two things are very different. I haven't ever really bought into we need to be a media company within an organization because we're trying to sell a product. And like a big way that you do that is through education. So I don't know. HubSpot, I think, is the best example of it being scaled, but they've scaled it in a way that's unsustainable to most other organizations.
Well, HubSpot, and the only one I know of HubSpot, I believe, is like My First Million, Sampar, and that podcast. That's the only one I know that from HubSpot that's on my radar. And they bought that podcasting company. Right. And say Sam and Sean started that when it was just them. They kind of going back to our original thesis, like they were the people. It was their baby, you know. And I could be wrong. I'm a betting man, and I would bet better than 50% odds that in 5 years Sam and Sean are not hosting that podcast. Or at least it's not affiliated with HubSpot. So then it brings us back to the beginning of like, can you do it with? Can you really scale can you scale a voice? Like, can you think of any blogs, podcasts, newsletters you follow that are written not by like the person behind the company, but are written by like multiple people that kind of add their voice to it, like personally?
Okay, so I do have one example, but it gets at your second point, which is the contrarian points of view and like not necessarily being afraid to say, I don't know. I guess this could go multiple ways. A16Z has built a great content operation and organization. They have multiple podcasts. They have a ton of industry thought leaders who write for them. They publish a lot of their own content. Now, part of that, I think, is that they're known as a thought leader already in the space. So there's this like influence that comes with it. But the content certainly helps to continue to propel that narrative and that vision. They seem to have done a really phenomenal job. And honestly, that's the model that like I'm getting a lot more interested in. It's kind of like a Harvard Business Review model too, which is like gather all the thought leaders, let them write. And of course, on the back end, you have to have a freaking phenomenal editorial process, editing process, integrated marketing process in order to get that out. You can't just accept anyone. You can't just accept any idea. Like there's a lot of work that goes into that. But this like idea of, I don't know, like a tide that rises, A16Z seems to have like really found a way forward there.
Interesting. And just because they have fantastic authors, I'm familiar with A16Z.
They do have fantastic authors. Yeah. They have fantastic authors, but I mean, like not even that, like you take like Sampar as an example, someone who used to work over at The Hustle, who helped launch their like paid program, like their paid content program. She was at HubSpot for a little bit and then moved over to A16Z, and now she's helping to run a lot of their podcasts. I think like that's a good example of someone who of that model, someone who like grew up in that, like, we're building a media company kind of space, launched a bunch of great products, landed at HubSpot as a result, and then was poached to a different organization.
Yeah, very cool. I'll have to check her out. I'm curious to know, I was diving into newsletter archives in preparation for this. And one thing that stood out to me that I thought was interesting is you believe that a lot of the stuff that worked like 10 years ago, when you and I were just like, young pups in the game, is coming back, becoming more effective. And you said webinars are hot, which kind of, I loved your copy because you said webinars were hot and I was reading it and I was like, really? And then like in the next one you call out, you're like, I see the eye roll on your face. Let me explain. And I was like, all right, well played on getting into my mind here. So great copy. So webinars are potentially hot, and then guest authorship. Like that's when things did so much guest blogging back in the day. And I have some questions about that too. Anyway, so as someone who comes to that, deeply respecting your work, a little skeptical of both of those things, what do you have thoughts on both of those? I'd love to hear those.
Oh man, if you would have like asked me this question beginning of last year, I would have been wildly skeptical on both of those things too. A lot has happened over the last year. One simply is SEO just isn't as reliable of a channel as it used to be. And it's getting a lot harder to win. So like set that kind of aside, because that has been where a lot of content organizations have focused for the last 5+ years, like almost exclusively. Webinars are becoming hot because brands need lead gen, right? Like content marketers aren't people who write for media companies. We're not putting ads out in order to drive revenue. Like we actually have to drive revenue. One of the ways historically that was done, of course, is, you drive content downloads through like white papers, you host online conferences, a lot of different things. But ultimately, what we've been seeing, at least over here at Klaviyo, is like, we did this big online conference last year that was wildly successful. And it turns out that after that, we found that we could do, like, if we were able to pull in like a big name kind of like influencer expert, someone who like really knows what they're talking about, we can drive almost as much success as we could in an online conference with these like one-off monthly hits. You know what that's called? That's a webinar. That's called a webinar strategy. Like there's like nothing brand new about that other than people being like, oh, actually, if we made it kind of like more showy and like brought in like the right people, and like I've had this conversation before. I had this conversation years ago. And so we're beginning to put that in place, and it is wild how well it is working. And I think there's a lot of things contributing to that. One is there's a lot of noise on the internet, both like written copy when you go to search, but you look at LinkedIn, there's a lot of noise there on a lot of the social channels. It is hard to find people that like you feel like you can trust their advice and their insights. Seeing people talk in interviews helps you gauge how well you can trust them, helps you understand if the information that they're giving is something that you want to follow. And I think like in this current media world, or like the way you find content discoverability paths, it's just really hard to like find what you trust. And that video and webinars is becoming a bit of a conduit for folks to do that. Two is that like webinar technology has just gotten more fun. You can like host a bunch of like cool quizzes. Like, of course there's like engagement, but like things like look nicer than they did before. That feels good. And then of course, marketing teams in general, as content marketing has become a more important kind of org within a lot of these larger brands, they're running more integrated more integrated marketing strategies. And as a result, they're able to place webinars and a variety of other assets in front of the right audiences in order to get those right people there. So I don't know, there's a few different things kind of converging, but webinars are like, I'm telling you, I was told, I think it was even like November. I think it was November of the last year. I started hearing it. People being like, webinars are hot. And I remember texting a good friend of mine, Nigel Stevens, who runs OGM, the OGM agency, which is a really great SEO agency. We worked together at BigCommerce, and I was like, "Can you believe it?" I was like, "This is so annoying. Like how like the new hot thing in content is webinars." And I'm like, "Welcome! Like how fun!" But they're right. It's working really well.
That means we have like 4.5 months to take advantage of it before everyone in their dog
exactly before it's gone.
which is rough. It also needs a new rebrand because you and I, like, we have a lot of nostalgia for like the early days, but webinar has never been something I've always been like, ick, like why would I ever get on a webinar? It sounds like an hour and a half waste of my time for maybe 2 minutes of actionable information.
Right. Well, and I will say, like, and I tried to write about that in Contentment, where it's like, you have to be like really thoughtful about how you put these programs together. If you are running webinars that are boring or are a waste of people's time, it's not going to work for you. You might get a lot of people signing up for the first one or two, and then nobody's going to come back. So like that part of it has to be really thoughtful. I'm in like an email chain with Noah Kagan right now because we have a webinar coming up with him where like he's in Austin, I'm in Austin. We're trying to figure out how we can either find a good place to do it in person or like be in the best studios with the best environments, the best audio, the coolest lighting, because like we don't want to get it wrong, right? Like you have a chance to impress people and show them that you are putting the same amount of effort and thought into those webinars as you do maybe one of those online conferences. And like, this is a trust winning exercise.
To that point, what do you think about one thing I've thought about doing is building almost 98% of the podcasts that I have ever done have been virtual. I'm not in the same place. It doesn't cost that much money. You can probably put together a really nice studio for $10,000. Mm-hmm. And if you were going to fly people in and do in-person interviews, I mean, plan to get $500. If you build a studio that has like a cool little apartment or something, it's not cheap, but you could probably do it for $3,000 a month. And assuming you can get people that willing to take the flight in, what do you think the advantages of? How much of an advantage is doing live content like that with people in person? More and more podcasts are doing this. A lot of the big ones, like Joe Rogan's done this for years and years.
Yep.
Do you think that's worth the extra investment?
I think it is worth the test. For tech companies, for content marketers, I think it's worth it to see if it makes a difference. I have a gut feeling that that in-person conversations bring something different to the table than virtual ones do. I have that gut feeling also because when I did, in fact, both of the online conferences that I've done have been in-person interviews that then like folks could watch virtually. That portion of it was really important to me. Again, there's just something that happens in person, the body language of it, the way questions get asked, like you can set a tone in a very different way. Now, would that make a massive, substantial difference for a brand over time? Maybe, maybe not. But I think it's worth the test for sure. Yeah. Especially when you see high caliber, talent or a lot of podcasts or other folks with larger audiences moving in that direction. I think anytime you see something like that, it's worth seeing if it could work for you. And for anyone listening, like you don't got to spend $10,000 to do it. There's a place in Austin, 5 minutes from me, that for $100 an hour has 4 different like beautiful studios already completely set up that you could book out every single time. Like get your guests there, bring them a couple tacos, like you're crushing it. And you can like test it for, 10 of those. And like, and see if it makes a real difference. I think it would, also because of the way integrated marketing and just the way content is needing to be cut these days. You cut that for social, there's YouTube sides of it. And like, there's just it feels like you put more investment into it if you are in person. Whether or not that was the case, people put a ton of investment into virtual as well. But there is this like, I don't know, this like weird human like feeling to seeing two people in the same room versus seeing two people on a screen.
Well, the chemistry is going to be better. Like the back and forth is just even it's, it seems like it'd be hard to expect that it would be worse.
It would be hard to expect that. Yeah. But I mean, I have lost a ton of A/B tests in my life. So I never know.
Fair point. What about guest posting? That was the other one that you think is coming back. And like, so you think about it, and I think we're in the same, we were talking about this, like SEO is getting harder. Yep. The old playbook for guest posting was sometimes in the past, you would do it to get the referral links and things like that occasionally, but really like by and large, 80, 90% of the value was the SEO juice that you got from the domain that came it over. So if you're doing that and SEO is beginning just a harder game in general to win, is it a guest posting with a different kind of twist to it? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's guest posting where you are trying to recreate what you and I did when we first started. I want to go find the practitioners who do not have time to write out a post, or maybe don't feel confident to do it, or maybe don't have the audience. I want to go find those folks who have the contrarian views, who have the best practices that nobody's heard of yet. Because the moment you see best practices on the internet, like everyone's doing them, they're not going to work as effectively for you anymore. I want to go find those people and have those folks as my guest authors. And this isn't about that individual maybe having multiple posts on my site. It's about I want to have just a large swath of guest authors who are experts with actual leading thoughts, with actual contrarian views. And I look to A16Z as an example. I look to Harvard Business Review as an example. Nobody crushed me on the internet for this. I even look to IBM as an example. IBM has been doing a good job at this. It's wild. And I'm like, okay, there's something here. And I think part of it, again, is I want more contrarian views. I want more content that breaks through the noise and isn't the definitive guide to email marketing. Who gives a shit? That sounds like that came from someone who hasn't actually done it. I want things with headlines and titles that sound like the person who wrote it is so deep in the trenches that my target audience could have written it themselves. That is who I'm looking for with a guest author program.
Yeah.
And I'll pay them. I'll pay them good money to write it. We'll interview them and ghostwrite it for them and still pay them. The money part, because we pay freelancers or historically have to write stuff for us. That part of it isn't part of the problem. Where in 2014, part of the reason I was so in on guest posting was because I had all of $0 to my name at BigCommerce and I needed help writing content. I needed the SEO juice. That's not the case anymore. I can go find those experts and I can pay them well to give them an audience.
If we have a podcast right now, this podcast, the amount of work it takes to take a conversation like this and turn it into a great blog post that talks about things is almost as much work as starting from scratch. And then you get back to the problem. If you have a repurposer, they go through, they take it, they write it up, they miss certain nuances because they are not the person who's oftentimes in the weeds or understands it the first person speaking or the people having the conversation. Yep. So we've also tried repurposing and found it surprisingly hard and underperforming. So I don't know if you've had better luck with that than we have, but it's been a tough hill for us.
Yeah. I mean, that has been my experience for the most part. However, we repurposed several of our Own It. So Clavio's online conference this past summer was the Own It conference. We repurposed several sessions from those and turned them into 3 different blog posts. And my goodness, if those aren't some of our best performing pieces, it's I'm telling you, I've run a million different A/B tests and it's every time I run it is completely different every time. Here's what I think we did differently with those that helped them work. One, we found a different angle and story, right? Like nobody's just going in and posting like the transcript, right? You're trying to like build a story out of it, but we were very intentional. So like one of the ones that's doing really well for us is about like retention marketing strategies. It's like ranking really well for retention marketing strategies. And it was a piece that was never necessarily optimized to do well on social, or to do well on search. But we have 4 different experts that are quoted in it. We make that very clear at the top. And then it's a story. It's a story arc. And it doesn't even necessarily follow the same story arc that was told in that session, right? Because that story arc might work as you're listening, but it doesn't work when you're reading it as an article, when you're like looking for like the logical arc in a piece. And so we did spend a good amount of time rewriting those and formatting them. I honestly thought we were getting them up to like appease others, but they're doing very, very well. And it, as a result, has really changed my tune on what's possible. I also just think though, this is the SERP changing too, right? Like this is the problem with like SEO tools in general, which is like, you know, we're like big ClearScope fans, love ClearScope. This is not like a bad thing on ClearScope. Use Ahrefs, love them too. SEO tools in general look at like historically what's done well, but the SERP had more volatility, not the SERP, Google SERP had more volatility last year than it has in a very long time. And it is wildly unclear on where they're going in 2024, which means a lot of those tools aren't that effective, right? Like they're going to tell you what has worked, maybe what's working for some of your competitors, maybe kind of where to focus. But like this has always been true for SEO, and it is more true now than ever. You need strategic human oversight to be in there saying like, this makes sense for this post or it doesn't. This is interesting to people or it's not. And I think one of the reasons those 3 posts for us are doing really well from that Own It conference is it's just very clear that there are experts who said these things, whose thoughts these are. Like, this is not regurgitated, curated information that already existed on the internet. It is something net new. And like it links specifically to those folks. Those folks also shared those pieces when it went live, which is part of what a guest program can be really helpful with. So like, I think the SERP is changing. I actually saw this. I think it might've been Tommy Walker on a post on LinkedIn the other day. Somebody asked like, what is like a contrarian SEO like point of view you have? And he was like, I don't think backlinks matter anymore. And everyone was like, so contrarian, like whatever. And he had fantastic reasons for thinking it. He was like, I don't think they matter anymore. Like I know Google says they matter. And I know that like historically, so many people think that these matter, but like, he's like, Google just has so much data. They know if like, I don't know, Shopify and BigCommerce have 2 of the same blog posts up, they can tell which one of those gets most traffic. Of that traffic, how far down on a page is someone going? How often are people clicking? Ultimately understanding how engaged folks are with that. The SERP was originally built from a backlink perspective. Like backlinks were there to help the SERP understand what was quality. I think Google has so much data now, they don't necessarily need that. And so anyways, all of that to say, I think Google SERP is changing really, really quickly. And as a result, like this goes back to I think we're going back to kind of 2014 methods. There's a lot of room for testing. Like very few people know I'm like a leader in the content marketing space. I don't know what the heck's happening out there. We're all trying to figure it out because things are changing so quickly.
When you say testing, are you talking about just throwing a lot of different types of things up on the wall, like taking the crazy advice, and I put crazy in quotes, something like facetious, but to try webinars again in 2024, see if it works? Are you talking about like split testing and, kind of optimizing style stuff when you say testing for content?
Honestly, I think it's kind of both, right? So one is, and like, it's not testing ever in terms of just throwing stuff against the wall, right? Like we're bringing webinars back because we have proof that they are working for us, right? And we are being very intentional about the formatting of those to make sure that they continue working for us. We're like A/B testing different styles and formats of content, both in terms of, I don't know, does a short form, there's this new word, I don't know if you've heard it or if any of your listeners have, called snackables. And they're very popular on LinkedIn. They're like kind of the like page size graphics you see on there that like typically have like a bunch of data, whatever. You know these well. They're called infographics. That's what they were back in 2014. But these are just shorter. They're smaller. They're like these like, page size infographics, and they're doing wildly well, especially on social platforms. And I think part of that is like people are busy. They're scrolling really fast. It's helpful to see information in a short visual form. Anyways, we're testing that kind of stuff in terms of putting that on social and putting it in our content. We're going to be testing different formats of our blog, even like table of contents on pages used to be really effective. Is it now? Things are changing so quickly. A lot of the assumptions in the content marketing world that folks work on were just from a different era, AKA a couple years ago. And it's worth testing those now to see what's working in order to see if you can get a little bit ahead. All you have to do is find one or two areas that are working that nobody else knows about yet. I mean, this is like what happened with Position Zero when Google first came out with that years ago. Our SEO guy at BigCommerce cracked the code, or it was a code at the time, that found that like putting an H6 in a piece of content helped get that piece included, or like that section included in Position Zero. I mean, for like a year, we were coasting on that information with very few other people knowing about it. It's not true anymore. It wasn't true after that year either. But like there's stuff like that out there, and you're not going to find it if you don't start questioning some of the like tried and true best practices. Like the industry is changing. There's places you can get ahead.
Total right turn here, only because I'm curious. Yes. You have a journalism background. That's kind of how you got started, I believe.
Yes.
And I don't know why it came as such a surprise to me, but years ago I realized that most major news organizations split test their headlines. And I heard that, and I was just like, I take you less seriously. I take all of you that do that way less seriously as journalists if you're split testing your headlines. You have the background in that. Do you have the same reaction to that? Like, does that bother you from a journalistic integrity background, or am I overreacting to that?
It doesn't bother. Well, I guess I want to see the tests, right? Like I want to see like the differences in what they're testing. It doesn't bother me like at first in terms of journalistic integrity, like not at all. I guess, I don't know. I'm like, how do I feel about it? I think it's better than the clickbait headlines. I left journalism when clickbait headlines were like the way you moved forward. And that felt really dirty to me. I think if you can A/B test headlines, that can like help you understand the like way to frame something, ideally based in truth, that drives more traffic for you, that like, that is inherently fine. But of course, like there are going to be people that misuse and abuse systems like that.
Yeah. It just seems like it would be so easy because everyone wants eyeballs, right? Like, and it's it seems like the temptation would be so easy to say the more outlandish a headline, like this is copywriting 101, the more curiosity provoking, the more intriguing, the more bombastic, the more likely people are going to click, right? And so it'd be so hard not to succumb to this temptation to try to sensationalize whatever side of the aisle you're on, the story that you're writing, to get more of those clicks and to like, so that's always what I was surprised.
I mean, yes, right? Like, I mean, this is not a podcast on like the wild state of media and like how it has gotten there. I mean, I would not want to be a journalist today. I wouldn't want to be at a media organization today. Like it seems like a wildly challenging place to be, to drive eyeballs in a way that isn't sensational. And that, of course, has really terrible repercussions for all of society.
No, I think we're very much in the same kind. It's fascinating hearing your the thoughts on the webinar and things, because it's funny. We did with Noah, he's got his book. And so we did one of those the other day. And I think with a little bit of creativity and a rebrand, I think there needs to be a new name.
There does. The webinar name sucks. It's so bad. It's so bad. But I almost just think this is hard when resources are low, all of that jazz. But there is something to this kind of gated, but community driven interview and open conversation, if you can properly foster that in a high enough quality way, that I think people really, really want, and organizations can help get that for them. It's not easy though. For instance, it's not easy. And there's a lot of internal convincing to do and a variety of things, but they're working really, really well.
It's funny. You had talked about people wanting to connect with people and trust and things like that. And that's one of the reasons why, for me, even though community has a lot of downsides, it's messy, it's hard to scale. There's all it's just takes forever to build, I think is amazing about it is there's a sense of, if you build the culture right and you're careful about who you let in and kind of the culture and the norms and the mores that you allow, and making sure everyone's respectful, and you can build a really deep sense of trust within this group of people, where people just go to that community and they're like, okay, I'm not going to get a BS answer here. I'm not going to get pitched on affiliate stuff here. The trust level is really high. So.
Right. Well, that's certainly true for your community. It's, there was some data that came out the other day. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but about how many searches on Google are thing Reddit. Right?
Yes.
People don't want to see all the SEO stuff. They want the community driven answers. Same thing with the Klaviyo community. We have a really great, powerful community, and the internal team loves it because folks can ask questions there. And again, resourcing is hard for all companies. And before the next morning and our team can hop on, other people have answered that person's question. Right. And so there are all of these really great benefits to it.
Your blog is fantastic. Blog/newsletter, netter, kind of the same thing, but I think it's a newsletter. You've written consistently for I'm not sure how long. What do you focus on with the newsletter to try to make it great? And I think one of the other big questions is from a consistency perspective, in content, it's important. The longer, man, I just feel more and more every year that goes by, I am more convinced, and I see the power of compounding professionally with time. I'm always convinced of the Warren Buffett quote that 98% of his wealth came after he was 65 years old or something, based on compounding. So anyway, I'd love to hear your ethos behind your newsletter, what you do to try to make it valuable. And then if there's anything other than just raw brute force discipline that you do to keep it so consistent.
Yeah, so I publish it every Wednesday. Sometimes, but rarely, I write them ahead of time. For instance, I was, on maternity leave for 6 months. Klaviyo gives fantastic maternity leave. And I had pre-written everything, and that was a pretty cool time for me. So I was able to kind of be off in that time, but have new content go live every week. Other than that, it was always really important to me that if I was going to write a newsletter, that the newsletter was a side job. Similar to how you and I began, I think it's really important. I think there's a lack of content out there written by people who are in the trenches every day doing the thing. And I am a director of content at a, former startup, because they're a public company now, at Klaviyo. I've been in this industry. I talk to a lot of other people. Part of the newsletter is what I'm facing, right? It's the revelations I've found, there's even been a couple issues like, oh gosh, that are like, like, this is hard, like embrace the chaos. Like half of them I feel like are letters to myself. It's like what I need to hear in order to like put one foot in front of the other. Other times it's just me trying to figure out a problem, and writing can be a really great way to do that. So making like setting aside the time to do it. And then other times are me like pontificating on like strategies and things that I think would be really effective that maybe I am doing in my current role, or maybe I'm not able to do. Things that I've heard and learned from other content leaders or VPs of marketing that I've chatted with. And then even the name of Contentment truly comes down to, I got very burned out at BigCommerce. It was the reason I left. I was there for about a little over 5 years. And there were the last several months, I was like shaking before going into work, and ended up quitting with like nothing lined up. I was just wildly burned out. And so like Contentment to me was a title where it's like, I need to teach people and myself how to do this role well without burning out. That's the goal. So I don't know. I don't really have a ton of advice there other than like that letter every week is to a large extent a letter to myself, and what like I wish someone would say to me in order to help me get through the week or figure out what's going on in the industry.
Yeah. How do you do that from a not burning out perspective? Like, what does that look like for you? Is it just reducing friction? Is it, because I think, yeah, that's such a huge part of it too. I faced that, honestly, like I'm kind of in the middle of like, how do I continue to create content that's fresh, that's interesting, that is, because I love people that are able to reinvent themselves. Like if you can't reinvent yourself, you're going to miss, you're going to either get, your interests are going to diverge from your audience. You're going to become stale. Like I look at people like, it may be a little cliche, but because they're such big names, but you look at people like John Mayer, who's been able to be a relevant musician for 20, 25 plus years, or even Taylor Swift, who's been, for that, 20 years, country music, to pop, to like, and
Beyonce's new country song.
Beyonce is doing, I didn't know she's doing country music now. I did not know that. I mean, Beyonce, like, and there's always the one hit wonders, but I think it's such a good aspiration to be able to reinvent yourself in a way that you are not just catering to your audience, but you're finding the overlap between what your audience wants and what you love. And you're able to like kind of track with that over decades. That's so cool. It's so rare. And I aspire to it. I think it's hard. Anyway, all that said, what do you do to not burn out? Like, because it's so easy to burn out. So do you have, and that's a hard question maybe, but are there things that you do? What do you do?
I mean, I'll be honest, coming back from mat leave has been wildly challenging. Like being out of it for 6 months and then thrown back into it, especially, I mean, it's hard always, I'm sure. It was, of course, a very volatile time in the content marketing world during that. It's been really hard. I've started therapy to help better integrate maybe some of the like values and things that I had before. For instance, I've always been very passionate about content in general. And it was never not like, I had no problem pre-baby drinking a couple glasses of wine at night and like building out decks and like getting really excited about stuff that like ultimately would put me ahead in the morning. And I don't do that now. I can't do that now. And so I am needing to figure out different ways of working in line with my like new values. And it has been wildly challenging. So therapy is one thing I'm doing. And then other than that, talking to people in the industry, that's been really helpful. I also, again, Klaviyo is a really great organization. I've been very open with my bosses there, with HR there. Like they are truly an organization that is like willing to help. So that's great. And by help, they listen, because like, what else can you do? So that's great. And part of that is like, yeah, breaking down content processes, trying to figure out where you can say yes and where you can say no, how to have great impact, learning how to like maybe even earlier raise red flags about needing help or additional resources. It is not always easy. And like one of the things that has really gotten me through the days, like since August was when I came back from mat leave, is just like one, reminding myself that like I've been in positions like this before, where this like kind of prolonged uncertainty, I've been here before and I've figured it out and I can figure it out again. And then also just like leaning on the larger community of people. Other people don't necessarily have answers, but like it helps to commiserate isn't the right word, but like hear that other people are facing a lot of the same problems and are trying to figure ways forward. For instance, like you saying that you struggle with it is helpful, right? Like anytime anyone opens up and talks about it. So I've tried to be clear on that in my newsletter. For instance, my newsletter, not this week, the week before, went out with a wild amount of copy errors in it. I did not spell check it before I sent it, and people were very upset. And the reason that happened was because I had a large project handed to me at work that week. I didn't have time to write the newsletter, but I was stoked and passionate. Like I knew what I wanted to write. And I was like, I'm going to wake up early or Wednesday morning, which is when it goes out. And I'm going to write this and it's going to be so good. I was so excited, whatever. And then like baby didn't sleep half the night. And so I didn't sleep half the night. And so I wake up at like 5 a.m. to write this newsletter that I feel so jazzed about and like load it all in and whatever and send it, that like I did not spell check it. I didn't read back through it. I was writing it on like 2 hours of sleep, like all the things combined. I think one person even emailed back and was like, you need to like slow down. And I was like, I sure do. Like, that is accurate. So like, I don't know. I'm not great at it all the time. And I think it changes depending on like your phase in life, on like what works for you and what doesn't. And I'm in a new kind of transitional phase for myself right now, where I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. It's super trying to balance stuff because writing takes a long time. Writing well takes a long time, then to proof it. I'm surprised you had people freak out about like especially people that like you deliver so much good stuff so consistently, for people to flip out over one. I think
that was it though. Like so many people responded and they were like, I love your stuff. What happened? You know, like there were so many.
Were you drunk
errors.
writing this?
Like,
were you like 2 bottles of wine in? Is everything okay over there?
I mean, I will also say I did. So then I did send it through spell check, and like it's updated on the website now. I apologize for it. And this like last thing, I was so embarrassed, felt so bad, like whatever. I did go through and spell check it though. And I was like, okay, yes. Like I see where people could feel like it wasn't like legible in some places, but I was like, only like 6 things had to be updated. Like it actually wasn't that much, but like, whatever, it's fine. It's fine. I will spell check and reread everything moving forward, and ideally not write things on 2 hours of sleep. That is my goal, but I also can't promise that. Like that's just life. Like stuff happens that you can't necessarily plan for.
Love it. Check it out. Last thing before we wrap this up, just rapid fire lightning round. So feel free to give me a quick, 1 word, 1 sentence answer to the questions.
Okay.
How would you describe the content marketing environment in 1 to 3 words right now?
Chaotic.
One of the fondest memories from your childhood.
But that can't be 1 word. What are you?
You're right. Okay. We'll go with.
Like, how do I tell this story in 1 word?
You've got to be very concise, and it may not be very accurate, but we'll get a hint of what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fondest memory. My grandpa owned, family still does, a cotton company. And like one of the like very first like jobs that I ever had was working out in that cotton company, like sending things through the machines. And I don't know, that and like playing on cotton bales was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's cool. Where was that cotton factory?
It is in Beaumont, Texas. Fred Clark
Beaumont,
Felt
Texas.
Company. If you need cotton, we got it.
We have a lot of people listening who buy it by the truckload. You live in Austin. If you weren't living in Austin, where would you live?
Oh, where would I live? Me and my wife are actually very interested in moving. Richmond, Virginia is one place we've been considering. And then like Jasper, Georgia, there's like, I don't know, just somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains. It's just like beautiful out there. It's affordable. It's like separated. It seems nice.
Yeah, very cool. Jasper, I have not heard of Jasper. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part of your work?
Process, like just the changing, constantly trying to update and improve process so that we can scale. It's a constant battle, and we learn every day.
This is the most fun, also awkward question of usually the interview.
Okay.
How much money in the bank is enough? So you can either do one of two ways of answering this. You can either say a lump sum. If I had $50 million, I'd be set for life. Or you can say an annual amount, like an annual amount coming into your bank account. If I had $500,000 a year coming in, I'd be set. So if you never get any more money, how much would be enough to live like a great, happy life?
I mean, I tell my wife all the time, if we had $10 million, I'd quit everything. We'd do nothing. That's it. That's all we need. So I think $10 million for us, but that's also like, technically, I think that's far more than we would need. That's like what we need right now with a baby. But yeah, I think that's where we'd be comfortable. I'm like, cause then you can just like save and compound and like do all this shit with it. I don't know. How much is yours?
Ooh, mine would be, I think mine is, I've always said 5 million. And I feel like over the years, I feel like that has stretched, or I've been tempted to stretch that. But I think if I'm not going to be happy with 5 million, I'm not going to be happy with like 25 million.
Right. Yeah. Well, and in fact, I think, is it Ezra Firestone? I think he was the one who said this on some social. I've been following him a lot recently because we're doing a webinar with him. But he said something along the lines of like, if you aren't happy, like where you are now, like you're going to struggle to be happy where you think you're going to be happy in the future, And I've been thinking a lot about that in particular, where it's like, like we're all so bad at remembering that piece of it. So like, you're right. Like less is more always.
Yeah. I've talked about this multiple times on the podcast, but have you ever read the book, The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel?
No.
A great book. The biggest takeaway I took from that book was he says, the number one thing that keeps people from like financial freedom, or the number one thing that people struggle with financially is moving their goalposts. Like, hey, I'll be happy when I get to 5 million. You get to 5 million. You're like, it's good, but I really would love a house here, or I'd really love to be able to do 2 houses or whatever it is. And then you always, and he, even if you billionaires are doing, anyway, the whole point of his book is like, if you can stop moving your goalposts, and when you hit that level and stop worrying about lifestyle increase, like creep, which is easy to say, so hard to do because I've seen it happen to me multiple times in my life. Anyway, that was, I thought, fascinating. So
that's something for all of us to get better at.
Yeah, 100%.
for sure. I mean, this is like turning into like this is a therapy conversation now. I'm into it.
Yeah, I'm super cheap. You'll be surprised at how affordable I am here. All right, last 2 questions. How many hours a week do you work?
Ooh, like probably about 40. Like I'm pretty strict about that.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite cause or charity?
Oh, what is the one? I listen to Sam Harris all the time, and he has so terrible. I donate to the one. I'm going to find it. So Sam Harris, if folks aren't familiar, has this whole thing where it's like, no matter what salary band you're at, always be donating like 10 to 20% of your income to causes, of course, like if you can, right? And then there's this one charity that he recommends GiveWell that like does the work of finding like the most reputable charities for you. Like, you know, it's hard to always tell like if charities are going to like use money like they say. And so GiveWell is an organization that does that for you. And it's kind of like mindless giving in a way. But I'm pretty subscribed to like that thought, which is like, no matter how much income you're making, always set aside like a certain percent to give. And I like the GiveWell thing because again, it just makes it kind of like automated for me in a way.
Yeah. Love it. And then last question, what's your number one hobby and you can't say work?
I mean, my family right now, but also I'm getting back into tennis. Y'all, I used to be really good at tennis and I've started taking lessons and stuff again. It's a freaking phenomenal.
So as a huge tennis fan, are you a pro pickleball or are you one of those the pickleballers must die in terms of which camp are you on as a tennis player?
I prefer tennis, but I don't mind pickleball. I like playing pickleball. A lot of other people like there's more people willing to play pickleball than tennis. So like, cool, I'll go do that. I will say I am not as good at pickleball as I am at tennis, primarily because of maybe everyone, the kitchen. You can't hit a ball and land in the kitchen. You know where you can do that? In tennis. And I have been playing tennis for so long that it's like such a hard like muscle memory thing to pull back on. So I always lose pickleball because I'm freaking in the kitchen.
Yeah, it's nothing is worse than getting an amazing slam, being in the kitchen, having someone call you out on it.
Yes.
And like it's especially after you get the, I 100% can relate to that. It's funny seeing some of the reactions. And I don't know, to be fair, because I grew up playing tennis, not a lot, but like enough to really enjoy it. Yeah. I love playing pickleball, play it with friends. Are the rumors about a whole cohort of people who hate cohort of tennis players who hate pickleball? Maybe those are just stories. I've heard them all the time, but I have yet to meet a tennis player who actually legitimately hates pickleball. Maybe these are all rumors.
I don't think I've met anybody who really hates pickleball either, though I guess like in my mind, and maybe this is just like a stereotype of tennis players, like in my mind, I'm like, I could see there being some really snooty tennis players who would hate it. I don't know them, but I could see like that's feasible.
Yeah, definitely one of the more buttoned up sports that, and again, coming from someone who enjoys playing tennis on occasion, yes, not going to be your most welcoming socially, just, a little more buttoned up for sure. So
yeah. Depending on the crowd you play with. So
it's true. Tracy, super fun to do this. Thank you so much. Again, if you enjoyed this, make sure you get on her newsletter, workweek.com. I think you said, right?
Workweek.com. You'll find Contentment on there.
Yeah. Hopefully we can work through some of this, like, these jaded feelings we have about the content world, kind of get through them. We'll have to like reconvene in maybe another year or two and have another therapy session, but so good to have you on. And thanks for all the good work you do. You've done an amazing job over the years, and look forward to continuing to follow you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Especially for the community that you've built. It's been phenomenal for the industry. I'm like truly in awe of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.